blessing be upon you this Monday. And thanks to everyone who joined us for Sons of Dust Ministry yesterday. Had a really good sermon, so hopefully you'll check that out. You may hear occasional commentary from Dana. She's awake, so she may have some things to offer today, or she may not. We'll see what happens. Don't know what's happening. And if you hear any noises, bucking in the background, that's our friend. We got a Rhode Island Red Annie up here today with us, who we're doing some rehabilitation on a little bit of a bum leg. Hopefully, it won't be too big of a problem.
The boys like her too much.
The boys, yeah, no, it's spring and the roosters are frisky. And we had ended up last year getting 3 pullets, which are female hens, from a person who provided lavenders, where 2 of the 3 have ended up being roosters in the end. So we're going to have to do something about that. It causes certain problems. And if you have too many men in the in the locker room there, it gets a little bit violent. One actually likes to come after me, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. He's kind of got. He's actually Eddie's got an interesting haircut. What happened was they got a little bit of frostbite this one day that was really cold. It got down to like -25, so they all lost a little bit of their comb. So whereas a rooster usually has a comb, you kind of think of a rooster, like a wave pattern. His kind of flattened, so he kind of looks like I don't know, like he's got like this kind of bowl cut. Not that's not right for a rooster, but it's like, how would you describe Eddie's like comb shape?
He looks like John Travolta from Grease.
He looks like John Travolta from
It
Grease.
just looks like it's a slicked back comb. And
it's a slick back comb. It's actually quite funny, and there's no real harm at this point. I mean, we treated it, and it's just hard when midwinter hits. But we're past it. But anyways, how much you guys want to hear about our roosters, right? We could do the cockerel hour with Tom and Dana. Where you get henpecked to death. Okay, so to the show, I want to say thank you to everyone who's here. Today's show, we're going to cover some odds and ends. If you have questions and you want to bring things up to the program, today's a great day for it, so we'll put that in there. But I do have some things that are going on out there that are pretty big, that are starting to come on the radar a little bit, that really isn't on everyone's radar, but I think they're things that are important enough to talk about, so we're going to cover them. Good morning, Keelan, and good morning to everyone who's here. Lord's blessing be upon you all. There's a lot going on around the world. The world is falling apart. You know what I was actually, since, we're talking in the morning, I always like to be a little bit more conversational. That's what you like. I mean, you're sitting there, you're drinking your coffee. I'm trying to drink my coffee between gulps, and, we're trying to put things out there. I was thinking, because I had someone send me a really nice email to my friends in Australia. Let me say thank you. And, I miss occasionally having the morning podcast. If I could have one, like a talk radio show, you know what I would call it? Beginning of the end. Your guide to everything that's going wrong. And I'd cover from every perspective, too. I wouldn't, like, everyone's like, oh, I talk about from the economic. I'm going to talk economic. I'm going to talk political. I'm going to talk military. I'm going to talk religious, And that's 1 minute we'll be talking about the stock market falling. Next day we'll be talking about meteor falling. We'll be talking about that. We'll talk fallen angels falling even more. But, well, the thing is, people couldn't keep up. Because I was confused, say, why do you talk about this and you don't talk about that? I was like, my track record is what it is. Catch up. But that's what it is. So in the morning, let me say thank you to everyone who's here. And then we'll get into the show. Just a reminder, those who want to support the program, this show happens because you make it happen. The Venmo is CVCPRV, P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine, 04739. And the super chats are enabled. Good news, I am going to be working actually later today to do the final touches on the book. And who knows, I may get it up today, I may get it up tomorrow, but it will be up no later than Wednesday, just because there's certain things happening around here. But I'm in a hurry to get it up because we've gotten the feedback we're going to get, and we're going to roll with it. It was very good. It's very helpful. I want to thank T, G, and J, you know who you are, for helping look over that and improving the book massively. So thank you for your help and your assistance and your friendship. I really appreciate that. All right, into the show. So I want to talk about the drought. And no one's talking about the drought, but it's starting to come up. The entire West, essentially. Dana was talking about the drought, and Dana drew it to my attention. I had seen it, and I knew it was in the background, but I saw a video yesterday from Lake Mead. For those who don't know where Lake Mead is on the Arizona-Nevada border that's sitting on the Colorado River watershed, if I remember right. I'm trying to think if that one comes in. Yeah. Okay, so the Lake Mead is there, and Lake Mead's just outside Las Vegas. About I think it's an hour and a half outside Las Vegas. Now, Lake Mead is famous for powering the Hoover Dam, which provides a great deal of electricity to California primarily, but also to Nevada and Arizona. You're talking about the cities of Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, San Diego, potentially, Southern California. Now, in the whole history of that site of Lake Mead, they've always had a sufficient water level to power the dam, and the intake valves of the dam are now sufficiently high that they are beneath the water, or excuse me, above the water level. So what's ended up happening is the Hoover Dam at some point may not be able to provide electricity for the California area because of the fact that that dam does not have enough water. And to say that it is that low is a sign of a much larger problem that's happening nationwide. Now, one of the things that I was reading, I was looking at the maps of this. Someone was kind enough to share that in one of the groups of where drought conditions are prevailing throughout the U.S. And without getting into exhaustive detail, nowhere is experiencing exceptionally wet conditions, except maybe a little bit in the upper Great Lakes, maybe just a little bit. But for the most part, everywhere west of the Mississippi River, if you were to draw a line with a couple small exceptions, is experiencing anywhere from moderate to severe drought. And this has been an ongoing problem. And what does that mean? That means there's going to be major issues with the food stock as well. That you're going to have more animal die off, you're going to have more fires. You remember, we've had some really terrible fires the last few years in California and other places. And we should expect that there's going to be reduced yield. And the predictions that I've been reading, they've been talking about the southeast growing area, the Midwest growing area, predicted that there would be rainfall under the average. Now, the East Coast will probably be a little bit better, only because we get the tropical flow coming off the Gulf Stream. But hey, anything can change. So keep an eye on that because it goes to the larger question of food scarcity, of energy scarcity. And we see the ongoing problems continuing. We're seeing the European Union say that they're going to have an eventual blockade over Russian gas. And that at the same time that they don't have enough energy, France announced yesterday two wonderful things now that Macron has been reselected. Number one is they're shutting down half of their nuclear reactors, which is a very curious
Oh.
choice considering that they don't have enough energy. And number two, that they're working to create a digital identity app that they just say till after the election. So we'll see how that works out for them. The EU is moving forward with this. And in fact, the EU is doing an interesting thing. The EU used to operate on the principle of unanimity. Every state had to be on board on something because the idea was that the states were sovereign. Much like in the same way the 10th Amendment was once a check on the power of the federal government in the United States. However, they're working to change that. And if they change that, what it will mean is that states in the East, for instance, that don't want to necessarily, bankrupt and impoverish their own people in a sanctioned regime to not have access to oil, although I don't know why the Russians are still providing it. States like Hungary, Slovakia, what would be another one? Croatia, will be able to be outvoted by the larger states. Now, I don't know what sort of structure they will have, if it will be the members of the European Parliament that will decide by number, and that's based on the number you have per country, based on the population size, or if it'll be like every country gets, a certain amount of votes, like they'll have a European Senate. I don't know how the heck that would even work. But what I do know is that Europe is moving forward with those sorts of decisions, and that will cause energy scarcity. At the same time, we were talking about food scarcity. Some of you will have seen the story coming out of Chesapeake, Virginia last night, where yet another food production factory went up. This was a soy producing facility that was linked to Purdue Farms in Chesapeake, Virginia, that will now be out of action for quite a while. And it's just the latest in a long and growing stretch of incidences that are affecting the food supply. Going back west, I read a story yesterday talking about the first reported case stateside of H5N1 bird flu in a human in the state of Colorado. And now we see over 30 states, I forget the exact number, it's growing all the time, who are placing restrictions on access to poultry. At the same time, the egg prices are in fact rising quite quickly. So y'all might make fun of me for having my hens, but we were ahead of the curve. If you don't have any, now might be a good time to get some, given the rising bird flu and that this is happening. Although what was really interesting, and this was the curious part of the story, the guy who ended up getting and contracting this bird flu was actually in a state correctional facility. So you have to kind of
What?
one. Yeah, I know, right?
What?
Yeah. So I don't know if he was just hanging out in the back, playing with the chickens and what happened. Because this does happen, actually. It's a weird thing, but apparently at certain prisons, because I know what happens in Maine, actually. What they do is they keep certain chickens there because it gives the prisoners something to do, and it provides eggs for the facility. I don't know if that's the case of what was in Colorado. The story didn't have that level of detail. I am reminded of the fact that when COVID outbroke, that there were a lot more people getting sick there. Some people would say it's because of the lack of cleanliness and hygienic nature of those conditions, which is inherent to having a whole bunch of people in involuntary confinement. There's truth in that. Or it could just be a really easy place to sick this out for someone where, the people who are involved can't give their side of the story. Not really sure. Take it as you will. That's the story. So that is yet another problem we're seeing, the ongoing problem with rising in fertilizer prices, and the inability of money to purchase things is going to be a bigger issue. Now, I'm hearing a lot of stories coming out of Europe of panic buying beginning to take off a little bit. The euro and yen have been going down. The supply stores apparently have been getting hit by people who are sending goods back to Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. You remember when COVID started with the masks? All the Chinese went to Home Depot and bought the masks by the ton. We are starting to see the lead indicators happening. This is anecdotal, but it's being reported in multiple places, multiple sources, multiple countries, of that people who are closer to the problem areas of this world are buying things in large number because the supply chains are breaking. You'll remember Shanghai was having that insane lockdown, and you're hearing a lot more chatter now about China and the issues over there, and the fact that they're trying to lock down their supply chain to potentially damage the West under the claim that it's COVID caused. A lot of different issues going on with that. Not really sure. We are in a fog of war scenario for sure. I read a really interesting article in relation to that yesterday. It was talking about how China may make the strategic decision to abandon Pakistan to try to make a better relationship with India, to try to realize Russia, India, and China in the same axis. Apparently, the West is really pissed off with India for their unwillingness to put in the sanction regime, and we may see in the coming weeks a sort of tit for tat punishment regime where if China can stabilize their situation with India, that allows them to focus on a single front war, basically, of the East Pacific, which would be what they would be looking at if they potentially were having a war with the West. Now, on the other hand of it, and this isn't something you're allowed to say, but it's the truth of it, there's a lot of policymakers in the West you hear, quietly behind closed doors and in think tank papers no one to read, questioning if a war with China now, while we still have relative economic parity, is a good idea. The dragon having certain advantages, a larger population, in some ways a better educated, more homogenous population, and the ability to produce their own actual goods. America's got bigger problems, like, for instance, the fact that for at least 5 years we won't be able to produce the chips we need for everything, which, if China took Taiwan, would be a major choke point. So it's no accident you're starting to see us more involved over there. And what we are doing in the first phase of this, though, is we are seeing the war with Russia continue to expand. So UK's in a bit of a tizzy this morning. The big news story, I forget the name of the show. It's basically like their Tucker Carlson in Russia, was showing an example of the Poseidon missile system and what it can do. And for those who aren't familiar with it, the Russian Poseidon missile system, basically it's a slow moving underwater torpedo that launches a radiological wave over your island that turns you into a dirty radioactive wasteland. And they were showing a graphic of doing this to the UK and how it would destroy the whole island, and that they could do this, and saying, well, they deserve it because they're awful. So, needless to say, that probably won't go over so well across the pond. But this is the driving situation where things are getting a lot worse, and we are hearing, that Russia's big Victory Day celebrations are exactly 1 week from today, for May 9th. That's the celebration of what we call VE Day here in the United States, victory over Germany in World War II. So we'll see if they have something big planned. We are seeing increased intensification of attacks in the Odessa direction. So we have been seeing the breaking of, was it bridges in the Dniester River area. A short version, and by the way, I would recommend, and I'll put a link to it a little bit later, if you want to see a sort of a strict military look at the war and how the ground operations have been going. The History Channel, I'm quite fond of them, called Kings and Generals. They do a lot of shows about ancient military campaigns. Is doing one. They've done up through the end of March, and they're promising one through the end of April here in the next day or so. Um, Very good channel, worth checking out, and it shows you really that the Ukrainians have made a spirited defense in a lot of ways. Really, the failures of the Russian regime, just bad planning. I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, I don't want to overstate this because this is very early, but it looks to me a bit like the problem that Hitler had in the 41 and when he went into Russia, that between splitting into three different army groups, Russia attacked from four different directions, from northwest of Ukraine, basically, through the Chernobyl corridor, in towards Kharkiv, through the Donbass, and out of Crimea. And really, only the Crimea and Donbass areas have worked as effectively as intended. Everyone, myself included, and I'll stand by this, thought that the Russians would cut through the Ukrainians very quickly, but because of various logistical problems, including lack of supplies, lack of food, lack of right gear, mud, which is always a problem because it didn't freeze enough, the Russian army was not as successful as I think they intended to be if their goal was the conquest or of Kharkiv, of Kiev, of some of these other cities. They did not succeed in that, and they have not succeeded as yet. And now this war is getting bigger. So we got to talk about the bill that was being proposed. I think was it Kinzinger? I think it's the guy's name. I want to say it's not Hunzinger. I think it's Kinzinger. Adam Kinzinger. I think it's his name. Republican House member, Illinois, and is putting a bill before the United States Congress that would say that the United States will come to the aid of Ukraine if Russia attacks them with a nuclear, biological, or chemical weapon in defense of the larger stand of democracy.
So does that mean that they're just going to raid one of the plants that we built over there and go that route?
As always, the color commentary is spot on. Dana's right. That what this does is it creates a tripwire that we can set off at any time. Remember, how did we get into the Second Iraq War? You remember Colin Powell and Yellow Cake and all these promises about, that we were going to find these things over there, and they never precipitated. Same sort of things being set up with Ukraine right now. And I think the only thing that's holding up the time schedule is the integration of Sweden and Finland into NATO at the same time as we are seeing the movement of mass logistical lines forward. And one of the things that you're hearing a lot about, I listen to some military tactical channels, is the question of who has access to what goods. America has gone out of its way to project that we are low on armaments. Nonetheless, the military industrial complex has always been the greatest moneymaker in the United States. So you have to ask yourself, when you think of people, I think was it Northrop Grumman was saying, they're not going to have Stinger missiles for several years because they stopped making them. Well, what were they making? Because I guarantee you one thing, the war machine never shuts down in the United States of America. And it makes me wonder if there isn't a little bit of public propaganda here that's happening, a little bit of subterfuge where the West is trying to show that it's weaker in terms of its industrial production when it comes to these sorts of goods. And I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are federal laws and different restrictions for certain technologies that require certain things to be made here. So the question of how exposed our supply chain is for critical military technologies is an open and interesting one, and perhaps it speaks to the reason why there has been a increased, how should I say, vehemence in the willingness to defend Taiwan these last few years, as well as an increased urgency at integrating Japan into the larger superstructure of this AUKUS thing, which is in and of itself perhaps based out of the conversations they were having at was it Ramstein Air Base in Germany. There is a lot of talk and chatter going between the Europeans and the Americans about the idea of a global NATO. And if that happens, you would expect to see the countries included into it to add Australia, maybe South Korea. That's a little tricky. Definitely Japan. Taiwan would want in, wherever they'd be let in. Depends how much they want to piss off China. Maybe Australia. We'll see. Now we are seeing an increased urgency in the Pacific theater now that the agreement between the Solomon Islands has been signed with China to develop. They want to develop airport infrastructure there. So basically, let's translate that to what that would be. That's an air base to bomb Australia in the fullness of time. And we'll see how much pushback there is. I believe there's an election there next, or I should say this month. Now we're in May. So we'll see what happens with that piece of news. Let's see what else is going on. Domestic politics, couldn't care. A bunch of liars, doesn't matter. We are seeing, let me think what else is important out there that I'm watching. We are seeing increasingly more countries move toward this idea of the digital green pass. Remember that green pass that you hated? The EU, what was her name? Ursula von der Leyen was saying all 27 countries of the EU would have to have integrated the COVID green pass system by the beginning of July. And I think it's something we probably need to keep a pretty close eye on. We are at the same time, you saw, what's her name? Deborah Birx was back in the news this morning. You remember her scarf lady who was busy, trying to muzzle everyone. She was saying that they anticipate that there will be a COVID outbreak of some intensity throughout the southeast of the U.S. this summer. So I don't know where she's getting that information from, but since I can't really make sense of it, since you usually have problems with sickness happen during the winter months, one would predict if she's out there saying it, perhaps maybe she knows something that we don't. So something to keep a very close eye on as we move forward.
I think there's a lot of these places where the water treatment plants have been going through some stuff.
Yeah.
There's outbreaks happening in those towns.
Do you know? Do you see any geographic pattern to
No,
these towns?
why?
No. But I mean, what area, what
I
region of
haven't
the
looked. I
country?
just heard that.
Were they
I
large cities or
I
small?
don't know,
Okay,
Tom. I just heard that there were some water treatment facilities, and every time they go in there and screw around with the water, there's an outbreak in that town.
fair enough. Well, the danger of, I mean, this is one of the things we would deal with. As we go into this situation where we have two competing scenarios, right? We have the appearance of a global war between two sides that are enacting many of the same sort of tendencies towards authoritarianism and control mechanisms of their own people at war with one another, as well as at war with their own people. And we see this in mass demonstrations that have been happening. I know that Paris continues to have some. I know there's a big outbreak of demonstrations in Armenia. Pakistan's still pissed that their president got tossed. What other country were you telling me about that was having problems? Canada. Oh yeah, they had a big demonstration up there in Ottawa yesterday. People are still sort of mad, although I think
They had a
unfortunately.
huge rally
Yeah,
there.
I read that there were 35,000 people somewhere, but I don't know. I mean, the problem is Ottawa doesn't care, and that's an issue they're going to have to deal with. Although, what was interesting, potentially, let's go to the secession separation front. I don't think anything ever happened to this, but this is interesting. Texas was looking to potentially identify the people coming across the border as invaders, and as because of that, maybe to act moving forward. It's interesting. Walls are being built and, frankly, being financed by the United States all around the world. Finland's building a border wall with Russia. Turkey's building a border wall with Iraq and Syria to keep people out. And we are building bridges across the now dry Rio Grande River for everyone who wants to come north here.
We don't need a bridge. It's already dried up.
But the good news for those of you who are hardcore on immigration is that Joe Biden's destroying the American economy so quickly. It won't be long before Mexican or Americans are fleeing south to Mexico to avoid vaccine mandates, and that we will see people not coming up here because there'll be nothing to grow. So maybe it'll all work out good for the people down there in the end. Who knows? But I know things are not going very well, and I know that there is continuing concern down south about those issues, where we are seeing this be a continuing issue. That was a terrible sentence.
Yeah, it
Um,
was.
I'm trying to think what else I want to cover because this was kind of like one of those random shows where I think it's going to be a big news week. I think a lot of things could happen this coming weekend. I'm just trying to look at broader trends that are out there, from the finance world, the bond markets, the treasury markets. Things we're seeing: the yen and euro continue to fall. Sovereign debt is less attractive than ever. Interest rates are going up. We could talk about the GDP in the United States declining 1.9%. I was listening to someone. I was listening to Canadian Prepper, actually. He was talking about that. He was saying how China comparatively is doing better because theirs went up 4.7%. And look, I have no doubt that they cooked the statistics here, and I suspect we're doing far worse than losing 2%. And the idea that we only have 8% inflation, I shop too much to know that. That doesn't work well. What I also know is that China lies like crazy. So their economy, considering half of it's locked down, isn't really going to be moving that quickly. And one of the things we are seeing is hoarding within nations and control of the domestic food supplies, because this is a problem they're worried about. Hey, good morning, James. I got your messages. I'll try to give you a call today. I only had a chance to listen late last evening. It's hard for me to go through all those audio things. I hope the things worked out good with the boat. What was I going to say beyond that? So,
The boat
what
times.
we. What's that?
The boat times.
Yeah, the boat times, yeah. Got Bailey's, right? Anyway, so what we are seeing in the short version is we are seeing the move toward a larger war that NATO wants. That's going to be caused for economic reasons, and that we are seeing artificial supply scarcity being created throughout the West to make people more willing to fight. And what that means, we'll see. And on top of that, we have a lot of stories coming out now that are starting to be pushed, suggesting that those who are not jabbed are the ones who are going to be responsible for getting the jab sick. I will tell you from our own personal experience, it's actually quite the opposite of that in terms of how this is working.
What
We
would you just say?
They're putting out stories that say the people who aren't jabbed are going to be responsible for getting the people who are jabbed sicker with the next strain.
No, it's the other way around.
I That's what I just said. Right. That's exactly what I just said. So that is something that has been ongoing. Been reading a number of interesting stories about some of the internals of these treatments that have been having. I'm sorry you have COVID, buddy. That's brutal. Yeah, I understand that. But this is a manufactured biological disease. And one other thing I want to mention too. It's easy to pass. I overlooked it, and I shouldn't have, but I did. May is Lyme Awareness Month, and in a lot of ways, Lyme is the prototype for what was done with COVID, an artificially manufactured, or I should say, exacerbated disease. You can look at the history of Plum Island in New York, how that carried over to Lyme, Connecticut. It was basically they brought over the super short version of it is they brought over German scientists after World War II, Operation Paperclip type ones, to consider how they could have agricultural warfare. In fact, I was seeing something. They were saying another story, not related to this specifically, but they were talking about how ticks in Texas, I want to say, were spreading something that was causing an allergy to red meat, which sounds kind of crazy, but this is the sort of thing they might
That's
try to
not a
do or
new
put.
thing, though, because
Yeah.
that happens with a lot of Lyme disease patients. Something happens with their genetic material; they develop an allergy to red meat.
Mm. Yeah, no,
So
I
it's
mean,
not a new thing.
okay, so well, all right. So this was being newly promoted, but as Dana's saying, this is not a new thing. So it even, and I'm glad you mentioned that because it fits better into the larger narrative I want to say, which is that we are seeing that the inclusion of as people get sick with these artificially created diseases, the change of our appetites, tendencies, natures that is happening is being set up in a way to facilitate the vision of the Great Reset, where you're not going to eat wanting to eat red meat, or you're not going to eat chickens. You're going to eat soy proteins. You're going to be constrained. You can't go out in nature. You can go to the city. And it's if you really want to think of it in a lot of ways, it's a herding mechanism. And if you go back to the history, to use Lyme as an example, where they basically were weaponizing what I guess you would say is they weaponized syphilis, sort of a sort of tick-borne version of syphilis, which is part of the root. That's it. It's got a syphilitic core. Why are you looking at me that way?
They're sister diseases, but it's not syphilis.
They weaponized it. What they did was they added other things to it. That's what I'm saying. They added
No,
they had the
Borrelia is.
spirochete. We're not talking Borrelia. We're talking about Burgdorferi.
That
They
is what it is.
bur- they put it together in a way where they basically hybridized and put a chimera of multiple different things because they wanted it to have the infectivity of one and they wanted it to have the resilience of another so it could hide like in the what's the cell wall,
The
um,
biofilms.
the
Maybe you should do a
biofilm.
little bit more research and
Well,
then
it's
come
been a
back and
long
talk
time
about.
since I've
Yeah,
had to
I think you should research and come back and revisit this.
anyway, but no, I remember syphilis was at the core of how they put this together. I remember that very clearly. And the point of it is, you don't have to know every little detail of every little bit of the disease, but what they basically do as a model is they create designer diseases in a way where they have the ability to kind of hide and lurk, but use the resilience of one area and the infectivity of another. Much like you're seeing with COVID, where you see on one day you'll see, how there's elements that look like HIV. On the other hand, you'll see other ones which look like SARS, and this is a common strategy that, especially in the post CRISPR era, is much more noticed. And yet, these are the beginnings of it, and that's where Lyme disease is so important in this narrative. So, I mean, every little detail. If you want to read, there are books out there. I can give you a list if you want, if anyone has any interest. And we've covered this many times in the past in different levels. So, but I'm saying this because this is a fear we legitimately have to watch out for, that this is an ongoing problem, that we should expect to see this moving forward as you hear about people having hemorrhagic fevers, as you hear about various health maladies around the world. Let me just say good morning to David, good morning to George, to Richard, and if I missed anyone, I apologize. So those are some of the things that I am looking at this morning. If there's anything you're looking at, by the way, one of the things, feel free to share information. But I'm right now, what I'm really keeping a close eye on is if we will see an acceleration of the war out in Ukraine. Um, the Transnistria thing continues to be an issue. That basically, if you want to think of it this way, this is a supply line that seems most reliable for how goods are getting into Ukraine for the fight, considering that the bombings by Russia on the different rail lines are taking down a lot of goods. If you believe both sides seem to be saying that, so I think that's true. And that we are seeing the president of Moldova was actually saying that if the people of Moldova were open to it, they would be open to a reunion with Romania. It's a long story why Moldova is separate. It has to do with the fact of where borders sat after World War II, which causes problems all throughout Eastern Europe. Russia basically moved all the borders further west and started carving out different states. It's the super short version of it. If you're curious about it, go look at it. But we are seeing that there was actually a U.S. senator, I think Haynes is his name, was over in Moldova, which was interesting. At the same time, Nancy Pelosi went to Ukraine, and we are seeing whatever's going to come out of that. But the promise seems to be that the West wants a larger war, that you see weapons being moved in through Moldova with the consent of the Romanians. And it does seem like the Poles, Romanians, and Baltics are pretty in with the war. Bulgaria, not so much. The Hungarians, definitely not so much. You don't hear as much about Slovakia. So we'll keep an eye on what happens. But and Turkey actually has taken a much harder line against Russia of late. So something must not have went well there. And Turkey's been working on a rapprochement with Israel. Perhaps Russia's closeness with Iran has been an issue there. I'm not really sure. Or maybe they're getting other inducements from elsewhere. So we'll see how that all plays out in the fullness of time in this strategy. Maybe it has to do with things happening in Syria as well. We are seeing also sporadic violence throughout the Middle East.
This is
What? What's wrong?
It does say that it employs a genetically modified hybrid of syphilis, like the one that they used in the Tuskegees.
I told you. I wasn't making it up. I did my research. You told me to. All right, my poor wife looks. She looks even more crestfallen than usual, but
So I have like weaponized syphilis now. Great.
not now. You have had it. It's not new. I mean, you've had it since you've
So
had
I'm
it.
just gonna call it that. Maybe people leave me alone.
They might take it more seriously, or they might accuse you of having an STD, which is not with the source of it. But this was the reason they built it that way. If you want to study the history of it, is they were looking at a way to fight the Soviet Union with agrarian warfare, where they would use the fields as a means to attack people. So the fact is, our United States government has been practicing this research for at least 60 years now. So when you start seeing all these problems with the crops in the fields and sicknesses coming out of there, know that there's a long and distinguished background that's been followed in this. So it's something you should be aware of that is an ongoing issue that we will need to be quite aware and protective of. So in the meantime, advice for you that's practical. Food prices and supply shortages are coming close to intersecting at a point where people are beginning to become aware of the issues. If the war expands, there will be a panic buy. If there are survival goods you want, now is the time to do it. And as ridiculous as the energy prices are, they're only going to get worse. Let me make a practical suggestion for you. Look at ways, if you are planning on going forward, to be able to use less electricity. I'm going to give you an example from our own lives, something Dane and I are doing is we have made the decision that we are going to go to a smaller portable washing solution for our clothing. And why did we do this?
Oh, we should do a demo.
Would you guys want us to do an unboxing video? I mean, I don't want to be. I always think those are so tacky, but people love them. You know,
No,
prepper
I wanna do
unboxing.
it.
All right, if Dana wants to do the unboxing video, we'll
You
do
have
it.
to
But
clean the bathroom first, though.
oh, they already know how bad it is. I mean, we've I do my videos down there sometimes, but we may not do it. We can do the unboxing here. I'm not going to run it, but we'll talk about it. So we did this. We made the decision to do so. We looked at a unit that was around $200. Which, by the way, we were able to do thanks to the generosity of some of your support. Which sounds like a sort of crazy thing, but for us, as you know, I got COVID the day I went to the laundromat, and going to the laundromat from where I am is literally an hour drive. So it's kind of a big thing, and we don't have the easy ability to produce the level of electricity to have um, a normal style washer and dryer. Just that, because if you think about it, not so much the washer is less the problem, but dryers, anything with a heating element. If you don't know your basics of home electricity and consumption usage, anything that has a heating element will kill your electric bill. And with energy rates going through the roof everywhere, promising that eventually we maybe see energy rationing, that your ability to have access to goods and services may be dependent upon doing things efficiently. At the low end, that's LED light bulbs. At the higher end, that's figuring out how to use local available burnables for fuel. Like if you're in Maine, you use wood instead of, let's say, gas, or I mean, you could use gas, but you're not going to have access to it, or the electrical grid. But in terms of this, what we were looking at is we have an engine. I think if I remember right, it's what was it, like 480 watts in the engine of
I
the
don't know.
washer, and then it's only,
I didn't look at the specs of the
that's
one that
fine.
we
It's like
picked up.
200 on the dryer. So what ends up happening, and you can, it's
Are you
not
talking
big.
about
It's
the
18
big
pounds.
dryer or the one that we just got?
The one we got.
The one that we just got doesn't have a heating element. It's just a
Right, it's just a
spinner.
spin cycle, so you have to do a spin cycle on a dry line. But we did that because one, we can take it with us wherever we go, which is a plus if we ever have to flee, if things get funny. Two, that it would be a massive savings of money because dryers use a ton of money. It just, if you run your
That
dryer,
ain't it. No, let's. The real reason we got it is because you are driving to Presque Isle every single time we need a load of laundry done, and that's obscene.
well, let's
The
do
price of gas is
sure.
obscene. You
If
put
I
in
have
$5
to,
to $6 into a machine every single time you need to run it. This thing will pay for itself in 3 months.
but I'm not explaining why it makes sense for us. I'm explaining why it makes sense
That's
for
why
them.
it makes sense for us.
Well, it did save. My wife, relentlessly pragmatic and brutally honest, is right in the fact that for when I had to drive to local laundry, and this is something I think about in my purchasing, and something you should think about. If you live in a rural area, this is a real thing you have to think about. How many trips you make, how much those trips cost. To give you an example, from Eagle Lake, okay, just use where the post office is, where you guys send things. The post office to Eagle Lake to Fort Kent, where our pharmacy is, okay, is a 23-mile drive, which with my vehicle is approximately 1 gallon in gas. So that's $4. So if I have to make that trip 5 days, 5 times a week, you're talking about that is a consumption of, let's see, 2 times 5, 10 gallons. That's $40, right? So you start thinking about how you could save. In the case of this, where I have to go to the laundromat, it ends up being, it costs me $12 to drive there, $12 to drive back, and it probably costs me about $15 when I'm there. So it's a $40 trip to do the laundry. Now, for some people, they might just laugh at that, but for some other people, that's very difficult
When you
because,
$40 is a lot of money.
well, it is, and not only that, because just a year and a half ago, that was only $20, and this is why a lot of people. I should say this, and it's actually a good teaching lesson, I guess. That for people who are middle or upper middle class who don't have the same exact concerns we do, you will think, oh, it's an inconvenience that I have to pay more at the tank. But if you live, let's say you are someone who lives, you're a pensioner, you're on disability, you're on welfare, whatever you are, you work a minimum wage job or roughly above. Like up here, there aren't too many jobs that pay more than $15 an hour. I'm fortunate that I am able to survive thanks to your generosity. But let's say you don't. If you start seeing that your fuel and energy consumption costs, which are in everything, they're in your direct consumption, right? Heating or cooling, electrical outputs, gas and transportation, but they're in your secondary costs too, because when you have to buy food and those big trucks have to rumble up Route 11, what ends up happening is you're paying more there too. So everywhere you go, energy hurts everything, and that's why it's such an inflationary cost for people. If you were living on a budget where you had fixed means, now it's very difficult, and a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, were getting support from the government up till relatively recently, and now we've reached the point where they're not getting that. So people are being pushed into more and more despair. And I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. We'll make it personal. I was walking through the Walmart in Presque Isle last time I was doing my laundry, and sometimes I have to go to the big laundromat because there's just certain things you can't put in a portable thing, like blankets that the chickens get a hold of. And that's fine because I do have to go there periodically, but I try to keep it down to once a month if I can help it. So what ends up happening is that I saw a lot of people walking through there, and I gotta say, Walmart was more expensive than the local stores because they were keeping up with national supply chain prices. But not only that, but there were a bunch of people walking through there looking for deals, and a bunch of people with mostly empty carts with a couple core items they had to get. Or when I went to a local supermarket, I walked in there thinking I'm going to find some things I want to get. This was the Hannaford in Presque Isle, I'll say it. And the only three things I decided to get by the end of it because I didn't like the pricing was I got bananas, bread, and milk, which were the three things I had to get. And literally, this was one of the interesting things I observed, and I'll just use it as a comparative and arbitrage. Um, the supermarkets in Madawaska and Fort Kent here in northern Maine, those are very small towns. One's a small college town, like a local community college. One is a town that used to be larger, but it got destroyed by the fact the border was shut with Canada. Poor Madawaska is in bad shape. They're lovely people. It's not that, but bad policy destroying things that is utterly beyond their control. That's what life at a border town is. Who knows? Maybe one day they'll be overrun by French Canadians, but I doubt it. Probably go the other direction. but I don't know. But in any case, the supermarkets there were cheaper than the supermarkets in Presque Isle, even though the supermarkets in Presque Isle had better logistical settings. And I was wondering, was it because Canadians were coming across from New Brunswick and buying food there? Maybe that's it. Or maybe they just don't have the supplies and their market can bear out a little more because they have a lot of medical professionals there. That town basically used to be the adjunct for the air bases that were here, like Loring Air Force Base, and there were others. So there's still a little bit of money there and a lot of people who own their properties outright, as well as some farmers. And, a lot of farmers are figuring out what they're going to do this year right now, especially in that region, because a couple of the big potato processing plants, like the one you saw in Belfast, are now shut down. So are they going to grow the potatoes? And I was at Tractor Supply. Feed prices are up. They have stabilized for the moment, but I don't think it's going to be that long before they
You
go
should
up
talk about
again.
the dog food too. How much the dog
Oh,
food
the
went up
dog
over
food went
there.
up double. It was crazy how much the dog food went up. I just couldn't believe it. And not that we have a dog, but we have a friend who has one who asked us to get something. So he gave me some money. And I went in there thinking I was going to get him some. And I couldn't because I was like, dude, this was twice as much as you said it was good, as it was last week. And he didn't know. It's not his fault. I didn't know either. But those are sort of the luxury indicators. Or I'll tell you the other big indicator. I've mentioned this before, but I invite you to do this challenge in your own supermarket with products you buy. It used to be the case you could get the value size, the family size, the whatever size cheaper, right? Like, I'll use a simple example. Great value green beans at Walmart, right? You used to be able to get, basically, there was a 12-ounce can that was usually 70 cents, let's say 60 to 70 cents. It used to be two for $1 if you go back far enough. And then there was a 28-ounce can, the larger can, like think of the tomato cans, like, maybe this size. It's not a great example because I can't bend my hand right, but um, that would be a little bit more, or but be less per unit volume. So, like, if the one was 70 cents, the other one would be like $1.20. Last time I went into Walmart, they didn't have the family size cans of corn or of green beans. And this wasn't just Presque Isle. I looked at multiple Walmarts. I looked at the one in Presque Isle. I looked at the one in Newport. I looked at the one in Bangor because I had to go downstate. So what ended up happening is they don't have the supply. And the other thing, when they do have the larger items that I've seen a number of different times, I've looked and I've seen an example. I'll give you an example. This was peas. Okay, I was looking at a bag of fresh sugar snap peas, and the bag that was 12 ounces, or whatever it was, I might not have the size, but the smaller one, which we'll call it 12 ounces, was $2.79. Okay, the 24-ounce bag was $5.99. So usually you would expect that to be different. You would expect the smaller bag to be like $4 and the bigger bag to be $6, because you would want to have, because you're buying in volume, you would expect to get a discount. But what I've been seeing in many products is that when you buy the volume size, the family size, the value size, that you are being charged more. And what does that say to me? This is an effort to change your buying behaviors to buy less, because there is, whether it's real or whether it's being induced, however it's happening, the supply shortage that's being indicated by that is something that you need to be concerned about. And so, while even you're seeing more stocked shelves, I encourage you to look at the size of the items on the shelves, because for a while they were playing the game where they put other products up, or the whole aisle of toilet paper, or there was the infamous one at Target where they have like 3 aisles of just bins. Like, they're putting, it's organization season. Well, what are you going to put in there? The stuff you can't buy. But when you start looking at the store, not only are you seeing shrinkflation, which is to say the reduced size of the goods that you're being able to use, but you're also seeing that the general basic size of things, if you see a more full shelf, the way they're covering for it is that you might have something where there's twice as many of the most commonly bought size of green beans. Okay, this is what they did at Walmart. But what you're not seeing is you don't even have the option to buy the family size anymore. And maybe that's different in your market. I don't know. It might depend what's happening. And I'm just using this as one example, but I've seen this with larger corporate brands as well. And the corporate brands aren't selling because the price is too expensive. The price point isn't being met. Because let's be honest, I mean, think of this market. You're a high-end canned green bean. The organic, expensive people who have money are going to Whole Foods, getting it fresh, getting from an organics market. If the people who live in the trailer are buying it at all, they're buying the cheapest one in the biggest size, so they can throw it in cream of mushroom soup and make a casserole dish with French fried onions on top of it. It's the reality of it. I know it's a tasty dish, by the way. A lot of calories, not good for you, lovely to eat. But the people who are buying a high end, I need the high end luxury Del Monte, canned green bean or
The
something.
luxury
Those
bean.
people are basically your Buick drivers. My dad loved Buicks.
Buick driver.
My dad's gone. No one's buying the Buick. People are buying an Alfa Romeo or they're buying, a Tesla, or they're buying whatever they'll get approved for on zero down credit, which is great value. But what they're not buying is they're not buying those high end products. And realistically, and I'm not. There was a news story about this
And
two
those
weeks ago.
beans better take me to another like fantasy realm
Yeah, no, they gotta
where there's
take you.
castles
Well,
and
your luck,
princesses.
you'd get the beans. You'd go visit Jack and find out he's a Nephilim. That's how it would go in your life.
I'd rather see the fairies. The
There
pretty
you go. So
fairies.
Tinkerbell over there. But these are the real life stories of it. And this is, so we're kind of having fun in the second half of the show here. But this is the real life sort of situational analysis thinking you have to do, is you have to look closely. And so the shelves look more full, and they are, but there's less product in a lot of way. And it's designed to get you used to the idea of austerity.
You know what
And
we
every
should
step
do?
of the way we've been seeing it.
We should start a hashtag. What was it? What did we call them? Beans?
What?
High bean privilege.
Bean privilege, yeah, no. Bean privilege by bean counters, It's now the Buick of beans. All right, so let's see. You guys are making some comments. I want to see what y'all are saying here. Let's see. Richard was telling me about the rooster and his noises. Yeah, the chickens are doing pretty good. They're doing all right. You might hear our girl here, Faith in the background.
It's Annie.
Or Annie, I'm sorry. Faith
Faith's
is
the boy.
Faith, yeah, Faith was supposed to be a girl, but all right, let's see.
Faith is a boy.
George writes, grow your own spuds cheap. Get your hands on some 20-gallon containers at your local nursery. Buy a bag of organic potatoes. If you can find Australian, I think it's crescent, but I can't say it says crush. Get those nice and waxy. They don't need any butter. But any organic potato will be good. Let them sprout eyes, then layer them at different depths, and they're good. And some good potting soil and chicken manure, and site your containers in a sunny location. So we've grown potatoes in containers. We can talk about this. One of the things that we had to know, actually, this was interesting, is different starches were, depending on my wife's diet because of her Lyme thing, caused her more problems. Like, she doesn't like gold or yellow potatoes as much, or brown
It's not
russets.
that I like them. It's
They don't agree with her.
Nightshades and Lyme patients are a bad combination. So anything in that
Potatoes, tomatoes, eggplant.
Any nightshade.
Right. So what we do is we have found that she likes, she can
I can
handle,
tolerate red potatoes.
she can handle reds. You can handle whites too. Interestingly, like
the
Kennebec
smaller
whites.
ones, like your big honkin'
fingerlings.
Idaho starchy ones. If they're, as long as they're small, like the red ones, purple ones, or the white ones, but those the big starchy ones, I can't do.
But this is another thing you should know. One of the things you can actually do, and Dana, correct me if I'm wrong here, is you can actually, with potatoes, you can cut them into pieces if you don't have a lot for growing. And as long as they each have their own eye, they'll grow separate potatoes from those different pieces, won't they?
You gotta be careful though, because you have to cure them, and a lot of mold can happen when you do that if you don't do it properly. That's what happened to me.
Yeah.
Our first year growing potatoes, like, oh, I learned that the hard way. But you can divide.
I seem to remember, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, so look it up yourself. But I think it's 3 parts soil, 1 part manure, and 1 part moss was what was the good growing mix we had up here. But look at your local area. You want to keep it moist. And potatoes, the interesting thing about potatoes is you can start them really early. Most potatoes are like on a 90-day cycle, if I remember right. So if you can start them even when it's snowing, they'll still keep coming up. It's always fun to watch the little spuds come forward, and you will have the ability to have quite a bit of food sustain you. And that's one of the things you need to learn, whatever grows locally and whatever you can easily put forward. Some of you know of my efforts to find a Zone 3 plum tree, which has been going very poorly. I will say this, that the people who are preparing, and this is a good sign in the one sense, that people are being prepared, and it's inconvenient in the sense that I'm late to the game, but I had to be for financial reasons. But we were looking at potentially getting a couple trees, and I will say that the fruit tree selections that are out there are a little bit bare this year in terms of your online market. Now, there are trees that are locally. I'll give you another example, so another story from my life, right? So I went to Tractor Supply because I was getting animal feed, which is, and by the way, I had such a hard time getting out of there. They had baby Orpingtons, they had, what else? They had the Bantams, they had the Reds, they had a couple other ones too. I forget which ones they all had. They had the Cornish Rocks, but I'm not getting into meat birds again. I learned my lesson. Poor meatwad. Anyway, but I go in there and they have a sale on fruit plants outside for 15% off, and the price wasn't bad. So I'm like looking at them. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll get 1 or 2. Maybe this will work. And I look at them and I'm like, they have Santa Rosa plums. And Santa Rosa plums are a lovely plum if you live in zone 5. And they're in zone 4. And I live in zone 3. And I'm like, why does Tractor Supply constantly sell plants that are going to die in the zone they put them in? And mind you, they might survive. For those who don't understand, quick, you just step And well,
I just opened chicken poop.
you did.
That's
Um,
fine.
okay, so just all right. So we'll give you a brief introduction to for those of
But
you who
all
don't
the
know.
Tractor Supplies do that.
I know they
At the
do
end
because
of
they're
every
centrally
year, we
planned out of.
just see them all sitting out there like dead,
They,
dying.
and it's hard to keep track of your plants. A lot of places are not good
But
at it. That's why I go to
they
individual.
should be more regionally conscious about
They should
what
be,
they sell.
and they're not. I mean, that's the Tractor Supply does not have good prices on a lot of things.
It,
They have good prices on a few things that you always have to use if you're a farmer. That's where they get you in there, and they make their
it
profits
just makes
otherwise.
me mad because it's a waste of life.
So, indeed. And what happened, and I saw this with apples as well. And look, some of them might survive depending on where you are. What you find, and to explain the growing zone thing, the USDA rates plants in growing zones from 2 to 9. 2 is you live on an ice cap, 9 is you live in a jungle, okay? But basically, what they're rating is the temperature tolerances of the plants and how much heat or cold they can handle. Think of it as a sliding scale. Most of America is between zones 5 and 8. But if you live in the far north like we do, or if you live in a really high area, or if you live in a jungle, you may have different things and you start to look at what your plants are. For instance, far northern Maine in the hills is 3 or 4, depending on where you are in those hills. When we used to live in Parkman, we were actually in zone 5, and that was only 200 miles away. So it really depends on microclimates, and you have to know certain things. And the other thing you have to know if you really get into it is you need to know what your temperatures go down to. For instance, the lowest temperature that Eagle Lake saw last year during the winter that I was aware of personally was minus 28. But on the other hand, let's say you had a small sapling and it was buried under 3 feet of snow, then you wouldn't have a problem with it being minus 38. The temperature would be around 30 degrees because what would happen is the snow would serve as an insulator. And that's why sometimes people can get away with plants in northern environments. Because what you're trying to prevent is you're trying to prevent the freezing of the water in the plant. And I think it's the phloem, if I remember right. Although I don't know if the xylem freezes as well. And in fact, it's playing on this is how maple sugar, maple syrup, all those things are made because they freeze and get solid at different temperatures, and then they tap it and bring it out,
Unless you're
which is
growing
why maple
kale,
works.
which
Oh,
which does better when it's frosted.
kale, yeah, the best kale actually tastes best after the first snowfall. But anyway, and these are things you learn if you're in this. You start learning about fun things like potassium and nitrogen and phosphorus. And honestly, I will say the number one mistake, there's a lot of number one mistakes people make. Number one mistake is like knowing what to put in the ground first, what not. But one common mistake that a lot of first time planters know is they think it's the plant when it's off in the soil. Knowing your soil chemistry, knowing what your plants can take, and having good soil. The biggest single investment you will make in your garden that will take years to perfect and that you should be able to buy your way around if you're going to be doing this in a serious way is to develop good soil. We used to run raised beds for years, and I swear to God, I'd spend $20 on plants and I spend $200 on soil. But that's what makes it grow. And then you have to consider how to be healthy with it, how to rotate it. And you have to understand what are the right plants for the environment, what is nitrogen fixing, what's nitrogen using, and how you rotate that over years. Because in the future, we may not have access to extra seed stock, especially considering how they've been genetically modified, which is why people get heirloom seeds, or how they've been, closing off access in terms of the ability to purchase. So you have to be aware of those things. But growing stuff in the ground is a lot of work. It's rewarding. It's a good thing to do. I recommend it. But trees are a long term investment. And so when you're looking at trees, you're looking at these zones. So if you're in zone 3, which is to say that a plant that can survive to minus 30, if I remember right, whereas zone 4 is minus 20, zone 5 is minus 10. Now, zone 4, I could probably get away with here. In fact, I think I could. I'm pretty sure I could. When it gets bigger, there'd be more trimming involved and there'd be more dead ends. But if you're in charge of your trees and you prune properly, which you usually do with most trees, in spring or in fall, that's something you would do naturally anyway. And like I said, there's tons of books about this. And if you're not a book person, go watch a video on YouTube. You just listen in the background. They'll explain it to you far better than I am. I don't want to kill your plants. But what I'm saying is people who go out there and sell those goods ought to know better than that. And I'm mad that Tractor Supply doesn't. But it's not just Tractor Supply. I've been to local nurseries who have the same problem. And the reason why is we have centralized distribution networks. And so apparently I looked at it and there's like two boutique tree farmers in Maine, basically. One has already sold out all their goods before winter even broke. And you couldn't have planted them in ground, but they had people who were buying their product who were from outside or they were preparing. And that's not uncommon. A lot of farmers will start doing their purchasing as early as February. So if you want to do it for this year, you're kind of gone. Now, are there other ways you could go about it? Sure, you could get seeds or seedlings. You could go onto Etsy. That's one place you wouldn't think of that you might want to take a look at, where you can actually find some rather interesting crop. But these are some of the questions you'd have to ask if you're going to prepare for that. But I'm going to say something that will surprise a lot of you. For security issues, for time involved issues, and for lack of understanding, if you haven't gotten deep into agriculture, get a couple plots, get a couple plants, grow some things. But if you don't know how to do it, odds are your head's going to be on a swivel and you're probably going to be too busy to do it in a lot of depth. If you can't have things that will grow naturally in your
If
environment,
you need to do it on the cheap, you can do vertical and horizontal stuff with pallets.
yeah.
You can basically like make a whole wall of lettuces just from using pallets. So there's ways that you could do it cheaply.
Yeah, there are, and there's some people who do some ingenious things, especially if you kind of learn how to do Appalachian pour. You figure out. I mean, people are really handy with making do with less, and the only thing that sucks about it is, well, actually, I'll tell you what actually happens. Poor people go to cities and they get things that city people throw away because they don't understand the utility of them, and they bring them back with them, and people look at it and say, "Oh, that's just junk." It's amazing what you can do with the right
Like a
junk.
push mower, like a manual
Yeah,
push
I like
mower.
I will tell you, I have a manual push mower for those places the chickens won't eat. And really that's how I look at it. You start to it's really kind of fascinating. Like if you're living in the country, you start to become a natural ecologist where you start thinking, all right, I have chickens. Chickens need food. Chickens eat grass. Grass needs fertilizer. Chickens leave poop. And you start to think of how there's a whole cycle of it. And of course, it requires some tweaking, right? But eventually, if you really did it right, I believe you could get these things to largely balance, at least somewhat, and then you just need the pieces there to tweak it along the way. And that's what a well organized plan would look like in the country. However, that being said, the odds are we're going to be in some form of economic collapse, civil unrest, world war, or potentially Nephilim invasion within the next several months. So you probably don't have time to go ahead and become a proper farmer. So, like Dana said, pick things that are easy. Don't pick something you can't manage. Don't get intimidated. But what you should be doing is looking to bolster your food supply. Me looking for trees is a long term investment. If it doesn't happen, I'm not going to cry about it. We prepared for other things. What you really should be getting into is long term, short, shelf stable foods. The price of rice is still relatively reachable. I would say go to your local big box warehouse thing or an ethnic store if that's better for you. Get big supplies of that. Get supplies of dry beans. Different things you can have, shelf stable foods. I mean, if you could, I was tempted, since we're talking about funny things, I always think about branding of the product of this channel. I was thinking, what was it, food under five? Like, I would be tempted to show you meals I could prepare for two people for under $5 that you could make based upon, and I could even show you the receipts if it came down to it, how you can actually have a really tasty meal. Now, a lot of this requires you to buy in bulk, and this is one of the things people are not good at, sort of planning. Like, I could make a really tasty dish. Now, you have to have spices on hand and all these things. You'd be like, oh, buying all those things would cost $50. And you're right. But you could use them 20 times. And figuring out how to make that net price work
And don't
out.
overlook spices
No, yeah.
when you buy. Because
In fact, I'll give you a piece of
things
advice.
taste better with cinnamon.
Look at how poor people in poor third world countries are able to eat and feed themselves if you want hints. Look at Mexico, look at India. The third most common spice in the world is cumin. Why? Because it's a great supplement for a lot of food sources.
And also look at like Great Depression victory gardens.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go at it, but I will say if you were assembling a basic spice rack, obviously salt, pepper, you're going to want in there, garlic, and these are spices you can get very cheaply. Some sort of an onion powder is good if you can have fresh onions. Fresh onions are better if you have them, but onions are a pain and they make you cry, so there's that. You
Garlic,
would have
oregano.
basil, oregano, garlic, yeah. Cumin would be in there, cinnamon, and people think of cinnamon as a sweet flavor. Cinnamon is not a sweet flavor. Cinnamon is a spicy flavor. Nutmeg
It's
even
hot.
more so.
Cinnamon's hot.
You can do a lot to add fun to it. And then when I'm looking at it, like if you were to see, if I was to go through my kitchen, how I put together a meal, often what it ends up being is like if I was making a multiple item pot and I want to make it tasty, usually you can go with some form of a bean, something tomato usually helps, or something with a little bit of a vinegar and acid in it to make things a little looser. You're going to have some sort of a spice you like with it, or some sort of seasoning, and some sort of meat.
Oh,
With rice, you can build a million different meals with that of
tell
different
them
flavors.
the the Mediterranean beef dish you made for me the other day with the feta and the olives and the ground beef.
Oh yeah, no, well yeah,
It
this is
was
what.
so good.
Well, yeah, I mean, Danish just gave me a challenge to make something. She's like, I want something Greek because
So
it's
this
a
is
healthy diet.
I give him the flavors that I'm craving or what my body is craving, and he just goes and whips it up.
Sure, and let's put it together, all right? So here's we go. We got a pound of beef, which would be I got it on sale, so it was $2.99. A single onion, which costs like I don't know, maybe $1. Chop that up, fry it up in a little bit of olive oil. Whatever you want to say, it's 10 cents of olive oil you put in there, not too much. And then you flavor that with salt, pepper, and if you want your meat to taste Greek, basically you can flavor it with cinnamon, with nutmeg, a little bit of garlic, salt, pepper, and if you want, depending on how you want to put it, cumin's the other thing they might put in there. So, and this is what they ate in Byzantium.
And this
You could
was
do
for
this,
beef and
and
lamb.
then we put yeah, lamb is amazing if you can get it. And I'll tell you what, if you happen to live in an urban area where there's lots of Muslims around, they tend to provide lamb much more cheaply there because they won't eat beef. So you can actually take advantage of that sometimes. So if you have like a college near that has something, or you let's say you lived in southern Maine and you want to go near Lewiston, you might get a better deal on it. Otherwise, you're stuck under beef, which is fine, but whatever it is. So you fry that all up, and we had some feta cheese. We had gotten a gigantic thing of it because we use it for different things. And then you put it together, and there's your meal, with a hint of lemon. Lemon's really good with that, but not that you guys want to know all of our cooking tips, but
And
you
if you're
can figure.
brave, you can throw a little bit of mint in there, and it'll be amazing.
And you start to learn the basic flavors. You can do a lot more than just old spaghetti and meatballs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, or even if you like, that's one of the things that you can learn if you want to be a really good cook and not spend a lot of money. You can learn how to buy a jar of ragu and what you add to it to doctor it. If you have basil, oregano, garlic, or if you want any fresh tomatoes, you could do those things. It's very easy, and these are things that you can do to make your life easier. And I will say, I'm always a big fan of this. I say this to anyone who will listen: get yourself a crock pot, get yourself two crock pots when you're busy, and as things get more expensive too. Like one of the things we've done once upon a time when I made more money because I was a worldly man, I could buy beef tenderloin, I could buy fancy steaks that would melt in your mouth, which is good because Lord knows I'm gumming half my food already anyway. So what ends up happening is now we have to buy a tougher cut of meat, but a tougher cut of meat isn't always bad. It can actually be very good for you, but you have to know how to work it. And so what you understand is acid and vinegar, right? So like I'll give you an example. My pantry has a lot of Worcestershire sauce in it. If you want to have beef have a classic traditional flavor, you can get if they have a sale on a big roast, where you can get a big roast that will provide 3 days of food, let's say, for maybe $10, $2.99 a pound, $3.99 a pound. How do you do it? You put it in the crock pot. You can put it in there with a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. You can put in there, they say beef broth, but the cheaper way to do it that actually I think comes out more flavorful, to be honest
Some
with you,
cooking wine too.
is some water with some beef bouillon in it. And you can just cook it in that, a little bit of onions in the bottom, a little bit of garlic you fry up, brown the sides, put it in there, let it cook, and it can be wonderful. As for me, one thing I am big very fond of, if you're gonna do crock pot cooking, I am terrible at making flour gravies because my flour always curdles and makes those little dingles, and they're like dumpling things. They're tasty enough, but it's not what I want. So I buy Wandra, which is a specialized mixing flour that goes into a lot of fluids, very easy, mixes in, thickens up. Some people prefer cornstarch. That's fine. Whatever you like to use. And when you use those items, you can build a very nice basic gravy, and then you have a dish. Like I'll give you an example. When I made it the other day, you could have you would have I put mushrooms in it, which were available. They were on sale, and I put beef in it. And I happened, because I live in northern Maine, to get some potatoes. So I got a great deal. It was actually a 5 pound bag of potatoes for $1.50, which was a special sale. So I made some mashed potatoes. Basically, in Dana's world, it's real easy. Add more butter. Add more and more butter, and put a little bit of garlic in there and cook that, and it came out pretty decent. Maybe I should have whipped it. Was it whipped it more? No, I needed more cream in it. You wanted. And I will tell you another thing. If you have a dish, one thing I've learned, and this is something that I learned by accident because I used to make this awesome tomato oxtail soup, but finding oxtails is very difficult. If you have a dish that calls for fatty meats and all you have are lean meats and you're kind of prepping and you're trying to save space, the way you can get around that is use your lean meat, But instead of where it calls for like a milk or a butter, use a cream, use a higher milk fat item, and you can get back some of that fat in it that you want, or use more oil. Or one thing we use around here, like when we brown our beef, we do have bacon regularly, and as part of what we use the bacon was we'll brown everything in the bacon fat, and we'll get those fats back in there. One of the biggest lies that I think's been perpetuated on people is you don't want to have a high fat, high cholesterol diet. All things in moderation, of course, but that's the material of your brain that makes you think. If you're just living on carbs, you're eating your own body. And a lot of people, a lot of preppers, a lot of things they put in there are very carb heavy. So put your real thought into how you're going to get your fats. I mean, literally, if that means getting a whole bunch of extra butter, and that's something you need to look at because butter is getting more and more expensive. Dairy is going to be a big problem going forward that a lot of us are going to have to deal with. I saw that it's up to an average of 3.49 now. It used to be 2.49, and people can laugh, but how many? If you're cooking, you could easily, if you're using this as a key cooking ingredient, you could use that you could use a whole thing every week of butter. So these are things you need to start thinking about. And how you can put those, how you can use these different dry beans. So those are some cooking advices. But yeah, for me, if like for instance, if I had $100 and you sent me into Walmart to come out with $100 worth of food to feed my family for a week, which is where you might be because that $100 today might be what $300 buys today could be what $100 buys. Or I should say, what $100 buys today may take $300 2 or 3 months from now, given the way things are happening because of supply shortages. You're buying your beans in cans or in dry. You're buying your spices that you need because those will stay relatively cheap. You're going to buy your starch you want at the base of it. I like rice more than others. Some people will choose noodles. Noodles are going up much faster than rice, though. What are some other ones? Some people like quinoa, couscous, whatever those things are. If you got a good price on them and they work for you, got to be careful those things expand in your stomach. Get some tomatoes. Hannaford the other day had the big cans for 92 cents actually. And I ended up buying a bunch of them because those are things you can mix in that will soften your meats, that will give flavor to things, and you can build as long as you have the right spicing, whatever you want with it. And then if you want to do it really cheaply, I mean, you could buy the canned white meat chicken. If you want long term shelf stable things, you could put in there. You could pressure cook beef, and something that we've done certainly before in the past. Or yeah, sure. She's
poor leg.
all right. So everyone say hi. This is Annie. So this is lard is another great example, and knowing what's in your area. And I will say one thing. One thing I'm hearing worldwide, oil is becoming difficult to get, and I don't mean petroleum. I mean cooking oil. Indonesia
Coconut oil
last week
too.
shut down coconut oil. You said it's a problem.
Yeah,
Palm
you
oil
can
is a
buy
problem.
like like huge
Olive
jugs
oil
of it.
may be a problem. So if you can get big supplies of oil, and do be selective. I mean, if I mean, I want to say something's better than nothing, but certain vegetable oils and peanut oils, I'm not
Yeah,
so
you don't
sure.
want canola. You don't want corn
Canola's
oil.
bad. Sunflower is not as bad, but we use olive oil almost
I'd stick with
exclusively.
olive and coconut oil,
I mean, there are other
avocado.
ones, yeah, but avocado's so expensive.
But
I mean,
like
most people
palm
can't.
oil, some of that stuff is so bad for you. It's so GMO'd.
Yeah.
Stick with the higher quality stuff. You won't regret it. Your brain will thank you.
And I'll be honest with you, I think pound for pound, more often than not, like we're either on olive oil or butter. And for the love of God, a whole generation got tricked into margarine. I don't know what they were thinking. That's like the dextrim of like artery death.
But you can't believe it's not butter.
Yeah, I can believe it's not butter. I can believe it real easy.
Wasn't your dad the one that was into margarine?
Yeah,
He
you know what?
always,
I'll give you. Yeah,
he
I'll
always
give you an
had a tub
interesting
of
test.
margarine in the
If you
fridge.
want to test, it's something you do. You can't do it unless you have a chicken, or maybe you can do it if you have a dog. I don't know, but like with certain foods, like certain animals won't eat them. If you want to use a test, like in the country, you can do this test. You leave like we did this when we lived up in Jackman. Actually, we left apples outside thinking the deer would eat them. We got at Walmart. They were
Yeah,
there days
we
later.
bought a bag of
I'm
apples
like,
from Walmart, and the deer,
maybe now. To be fair, now I learned later.
they were like, nah.
Well, I learned later with some of these things, what they do is they spray a protective coating on the food so it lasts longer, which, by the way, you're eating. So think about how you get your foods. Think about how animals respond to them. And there's a reason they send canaries into coal mine or chickens into the larder. You going to help us out with that? Are you gonna help us out with that?
Such a good chicken.
She's a good chicken. She's kind of got a stinky bum though. I mean, that's one of the other things too. If you ever live on a farm, you better learn to get nose blind fast. It's a difficult thing, but it's something you have to deal with. So anyway, that's life on the homestead as it ever is. And hopefully there's some practical tips in there for you. I don't know. One other thing that we found worked pretty good if you want to do something on the cheap in container gardening, if it's around you, if you know a place where you can get tires, old tires that aren't being used, they make for great container gardens, especially when you have a single larger
Yeah,
thing
you
you
could
want
put
to
a
put in there.
mound of pumpkins. You could put like 6 plants in one tire.
Oh yeah, and as Dana will say, I mean, one of the things that's really useful if you're in a winter environment, and mind you, you may not love it, but it is a thing. Squash, pumpkins, those sort of bigger things. We'll see those be good for because they'll last. They'll be shelf stable through the winter. I mean, we're assuming that we'll have electricity through all that, but maybe we won't, and that's a problem. And most people, like a lot of prepping shows, go out there and be like, the solution to this is to get a $20,000 system of solar. I mean, who the hell are you kidding? The same people who can't afford to get behind a $5 paywall, they're going to do that, you
Jeff
know?
Irwin got $5 in his wallet.
I mean, you'd be better off investing money and figuring how to splice a line out like the old people used to take cable, you know? And I'm not saying that to be mean, but that's how it's going to be. So, how can you avoid this? You make friends, you make family. And I will say one thing that's going to happen in the future, and you might want to start thinking about this now, especially if you have people in your orbit. I think the old days of us having just little two people living together, little nuclear families, and not pairing up and having bigger groups is going to go away. If nothing else, even if you tried to survive with these things, the security requirements are very difficult. It's like one of the reasons why I won't grow a big crop outside. Even though I'm not scared where I am, I know if people aren't growing food and I have food and they don't, and they're going to, it's just a thing. You have to think about that really smartly, and then you have to think about the daily subterfuge of it. Unless you're so far out, you don't have to worry. And none of us are ever really that far out. But if we have friends and we have a community and we can protect one another, that'll be better. And who knows, maybe Pineland will manage that one day, you know?
Also, another really fun thing to do is if you're on a property that has any sort of wooded area, you can kind of covertly plant things like in and amongst
And that's
the
true,
wooded
yeah. I mean, you'd be
area.
surprised what people don't realize is food.
Berry bushes back there.
Sure.
Yeah, go nuts.
We get, like in Maine, you see a lot of blueberries like that. And a lot of people know where to pick them, to be honest. Because they do grow naturally. And what grows naturally in your area is something you need to know. Corey writes, many tire shops will give old tires away just so they don't have to pay to get rid of them. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places, like in New England, they call them transfer stations. You know them as the dump. Although, I think down south, a lot of places, they just pick up your trash directly. But you go here, they have stores, they have
we
whole
had
things.
like 13 tires one year.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
And they worked well.
But
the things grew well.
They're really good for making little pumpkin mounds.
The only warning I want to give you is if you're using tires, do be aware of this, especially if you're in a hot environment, they can leach a little bit. Not so much of a problem in Maine, but if you're somewhere where the temperature is over 100 degrees regularly, something you need to be aware of. So, like I said, I mean, limitations on advice. If you follow anything I tell you about doing your own research, then you know what? I'm not liable for it, but I'm just telling you these are things.
To cut down on the amount of dirt that you put in the tire, you can fill the tire itself with dead leaves, small twigs, any sort of organic debris to kind of fill in that space because you don't want your super good dirt going in there, but it'll help compost and
it'll provide stability if rain wash off is a problem in your area.
like I'm going to be putting chicken bedding in ours.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That makes good
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, I mean, you have to be aware of that and how to use the resources around you. I mean, what you learn to do is how to operate in your own environment, and to the greater extent you're operating in your environment with things people don't want and what nature provides, you're not dependent on the system. That's the real
Yeah.
independence.
If you have the ability to pull something out of somebody's garbage can and be like, oh, I could use this, then you're pretty good to go.
Right, and I mean, people will make fun, oh, yeah, trash pickers. You know, the thing about it is, if someone doesn't want something and you can use it, repurposing is actually a very good and useful thing.
I have no
And
shame about dumpster diving.
You're going, and it's not. Yeah, it's not. And don't interpret that to think that my wife is going around wandering into every trash can looking for
No, but
treasures.
the first
It's
time
not like that. But you see things that are being thrown away.
the first time you took me to the dump up here,
Mm.
like I was like clutching the window, like looking out. I'm like, is it crazy that I just want to go jump in the dumpster and see what they got? Because I saw bicycles, I saw stoves,
So
I saw fridges.
So let me offer a little context for
I'm like,
those
oh,
of you
we
who
can
don't
build
live in New
this.
England. Northern New England, maybe because it's the old Yankee heritage, really separates out its different
It
trash.
was
So
like
like
going to the
you'll
mall.
see there's like a container full of metal scrap. There's a container full of wood scrap. And then there's like household waste, which you wouldn't go into for anything. So you find find that there are these things that you can get, and people get rid of them, and even like if you can't use the goods, like you can break it apart, use the substances, use the fittings. You could use that to make a raised container bed. Like, I'll give you an example. Imagine an old water bed, right? My parents used to have one, and it had this like wood thing that would make an amazing raised bed if you just had the frame of that, because it would be like 18 inches high, and it'd be what's the It's 60 by 72, 60 by 84, something like that. It
Oh,
was a king.
yeah, I don't know.
It was long in any case. So you would have a big place you could use, for things, and you can find these things. Which is why in the country you need to have a truck, or you need to have something, at least a big SUV, which is
But
terrible though, because the gas price kills you.
creativity goes a very, very long way when you're homesteading, especially when you don't have a whole lot of access to things or means. Like finding a scrap pile of wood
Trees
could
will go
like
sideways.
could make your day, or a scrap pile of
And
like metal sheeting. It's like, oh, chicken coop roof.
and for those of you who are deciding to move to the country, and I covered this a little bit in my book Surviving the Fall of America, the trade-off you're basically making usually is you're going to have less money for less problems. Your problems are going to be new, and you're not going to have an easy situation with potentially financially doing things. Now, a lot of people are blessed that they can carry their job with them, because if you had a job, let's say this, if you lived in northern Maine and your job paid you, let's say $70,000, which I think is not a super high income in a lot of urban areas, you could literally live like a king up here. You could afford your mortgage very easily, except for the fact the electric company's insane with their prices. You'd be fine. And if you can solve a solution for that through a wood heating system or other means, maybe a little bit solar, you can add in. Or, you know what, you just find a way to use the ground and terrain to work for you in terms of what you set up. You would be able to live quite well. Whereas us, we have chosen, we live in faith. And so we figured out ways to make things work week to
We
week,
live
month to
on
month.
faith and
And the,
Pop-Tarts.
the the upside of it is I get to say things that are true and have interesting things like this program as my vocation, and I write books, and I take care of my birds, and I don't have to compromise with the world system, so
What
that
about
when
your
they
wife?
and my wife, of course,
Okay.
but we live with. But when the world comes back at us, right, and it says that, hey, you have to get a shot, or we're not going to let you participate, we can choose to stay outside. And that's why we do what we do. People think, you're crazy. Why don't you go somewhere it's warm and it's easy and get a job and all those things? Because we don't want to be part of the
Because we don't
system
want
that
to.
we've seen. All of us have seen the creeping totalitarianism. The things they did under COVID were a test run. The only thing they're not happy about is they didn't get to go all the way. All that's going to come back. Will it be because of war against the Russians? Will it be because of some terrible pandemic? Will it be just because they can? Who knows? But the two visions we have of the future that Dana and I, actually believe is, one is we will have collapse of society around us because of the evils around us, or we have a totalitarianism that creeps into all things, and maybe both at once. And so the fact that we don't have to make those decisions is a choice we make. And do we have a harder life for it? You bet we do. Are there things we miss? Of course. Are there challenges?
Hey,
Yes.
Brandino. He
The,
said, I successfully ate out of dumpsters in Costa Rica for 2 months, and I ate better than I've ever eaten stateside.
Ay caliente.
I love it.
Uh,
Well,
no,
you can come up here with me, and we'll go dumpster diving and see what treasures we can find.
exactly.
Like Tamatoa. We need to be shiny.
Right. Yeah, we have Tamatoa sitting right there. All right, so
I'm just a
James is
discriminator.
writing about the picohydro. Yeah, you could do things like that. I mean, there are so many things you can do. You put a we were watching a video. The guy
Oh
was in
yeah, that guy
Virginia.
that had the turbine.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was an
so
amazing
cool.
system he had set up. We got into this long conversation. Why is he switching from AC to DC back to AC? Because it was weird. His engine went AC, and we would have thought they would have went DC because he had his batteries right there. But anyway, I don't want to get into all the details of it, but I realized he did it to have a faster charging station. I mean, if the guy put this much work into it, he obviously had a reason for what he did. And the thing that's interesting is you start to understand how things around you work in your world, and your world gets smaller, but you're more engaged in it, and that's the trade-off of living in this. And that's, I think that's part of a healthy Pineland vision. I want to give credit to someone. People think I'm a right-wing hack a lot of times, but like the Vermonters, we used to live over by the Vermont border, and a lot of people in Vermont are really clever at using these sort of things. Like when it comes to bigger philosophies, they're still brainwashed. But when it comes to day-to-day living, you can learn a lot. And that's what you find. The people who
I would
have
hang with Vermont hippies.
yeah, when you live close to people and you all live in the earth and you all have a lot of things in common and you live in the world, not the world of just the internet and ideas, you actually have the ability to do things that are meaningful. When farmers get together and they're talking about crops and rain and what, you'd be surprised how much we all have in common. And that's what we have. We have a world where we've artificially been induced not to have anything in common, where we live at a detachment from ourselves and from our world. So if I can leave you with a final message from Pineland this morning, it's get out in there, get out in the world, and make your world be around you. You know, where you live should be central to where your life is. If all that you get from where you live is a domicile that's close to your work, you're living in the wrong place. Your home is just a tenement, a renter facility, a house. You, by living that way, are enabling the Great Reset, because how much do you really care about your home other than, well, it has financial value? All right, so when it's not worth money, what's it mean to you?
I have a really good idea.
What's your good idea?
I was listening to one prepper. It was a younger guy, and he was in a neighborhood where there was a lot of older or sick or just retired people that have let their own backyard gardens
They
go.
love this.
And he was saying, like, all I had to do was go knock on people's doors and say, hey, I noticed, you know, you have a garden, like, I'll come take care of it, I'll plant the stuff. And like, they are creating like a community within.
They're going to be resilient, they're going to be redundant, they're going to be safer, they're going to be healthier.
But if you're in a community where like you're the only young person and there's a bunch of old people who have a lot of land or in their front yard, or you can see that they have garden boxes that have broken down, like, go fix them up, throw some tomatoes in there, like offer to share the crop. Like, yeah, just go knock on doors. It could work. I mean, it worked for other people.
Corey just wrote, the chicken is loving life. I'm doing the under thing where she goes like, chickens love, they can't reach it. They like to peck everywhere, but they can't reach their own comb. So yeah, this is like, if you want a chicken to love you, by the way, this pro tip, Dana taught me this one. They love that.
And they love having their ears scratched, like right up here. They'll just go right to sleep. But she's missing a whole bunch of feathers up here.
Yeah, no.
And she's got a little bit of a limp.
Watching animals mate is literally terrifying. It's not fun, like National Geographic, especially birds.
The boys really like her a lot.
The bird way of mating is to peck the chicken behind the head or on the back, hold them in place,
pin them down.
And yeah, it's let's call it what it is. It's bird rape. Here, let me give it to you.
Poultry reproduction's violent.
It's really ugly to watch, and it's painful because they get real loud and then it's over in 5 seconds. So,
but she's a little bit beat up, so she's gonna be inside.
Yeah,
for
her legs are a little hurt. We're trying to help
Poor
her
thing's
heal
got
up.
a bald spot.
But anyway, all right, let's see. Yes, and shop safe women whose husbands have passed, tool and work shape and clan building. So this is what
yes.
So yeah, these are the sort of
older women like your grandmas will any day of the week accept the help of like a young, trustworthy.
And it's not just one way, you know. Older people have skills, knowledge, and ability and experience, like seamstresses, or you know, people have canning. Like one of my neighbors is used to be a high school science teacher. And he has taught me amazing things about resurrecting, you know, dead machinery. And people like that are people you want in your group. I mean, and generational knowledge and the ability for people to be able to work on the same things, know the same things is really important. But to get back to what I was saying to you, if all your house is a place you go to work from and a property investment, you're doing it wrong. Your home should be a home. It should be an integral part of how you live. And I would think a better vision of the future, and at least my Pineland vision of the future, is your home should play at least as much a role in how you live and survive as your work does. Because that's what independence is. Otherwise, you're always at the behest of someone else and some surrogate thing like money. You know, decentralized electricity. And you know, the thing is, nature will automatically lead to these sort of outcomes, because if we're all in one hive place, we will lose our humanity. So if you're trying to fight for your humanity, you're going to end up maybe in a nicer version of what we're doing, because maybe your resources allow that, but you're going to end up coming to some of the same conclusions we did, because this is how we're going to survive. And our primary imperative is to live and die as humans, as our Lord Jesus intended, as we were made in the vision of our Creator, and that's what we do here in Pineland. And you know, one of the reasons this is growing and the ministry is growing as well, which I'm really excited about, is people are understanding and wanting this vision. And so hopefully we find people who want to contribute and buy in. For some people, that's going to be taking their capital, knowing that they don't have a lot of skills, but hey, having the right mindset and learning and being a part of the team. For other people who have a lot of skills but never found a way, it's helping lead that effort. And we're going to try to find the right people with the right ideas where we can come together. You know, we talk about for the Pineland vision that it's faith, it's folk, it's family, it's the people who are working together, and that we can accomplish this. And that's my hope, that eventually we get there. I mean, in a small way, we live there, but you know, we are just kind of, how to say, we're scouts for something much larger. That's how we look at it. And the answer is, and we're not trying to change the world. We're trying to get away from it because we know that this isn't our ultimate home. And that's the most important part of it. I know a lot of people don't understand that bit with the faith, but the reason I say that is you're either living for the world or living for something greater than the world. And if you're living for the world, you'll always compromise what you believe to survive. We all have to do that sometimes. In reality and pragmatism, that happens. But the less you have to do that, the more you could actually be a person you want to be. And that's what true freedom is. I mean, true freedom isn't having a big bank account when that can be canceled. I mean, people who are very wealthy think they have freedom. But a lot of times it has been my experience that the obligations that places on them destroys their ability to do what they want. They're allowed greater leisures, they're allowed greater parole, but freedom means not having to rely on anyone else to do what you want to do, or at least the choosing the people you want to rely upon. So that's the division of
It's just
self-sufficiency as it's
prison.
communal.
You just pick your prison. That's all.
You pick your prison. Dana's absolutely correct. So let's say a prayer to that extent. Heavenly Father, we ask that you lead us back into the garden, that we can live under your protection, that we can live in a place where we love one another and where we realize your vision by taking care of one another as your Son, the Lord Jesus, instructed, and that we live close to the earth, the land, and the gifts you've given us, and then we offer our thanks for the many wonderful things you've shared with us, including this community of Pinelanders. In Jesus' mighty name, I pray this. Amen. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us. Different show than I planned this morning. Really, a two-part show. I'm surprised the phone didn't cut out during it, but it's a blessing that it didn't. For those who want to support the program, the Venmo CVC PRV. P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine, 04739. Keep an eye out for the new book. We'll have it up by the end of this week. That's my commitment to you. If we don't, it will be because Amazon's giving me a hard time, but they usually don't. And that'll be something that will be useful to you. And other than that, please keep safe and say a prayer for us. We've been under a lot lately, but we're coming into spring. Hopefully, we'll emerge strong and continue to do the work we do here in Pineland, between the ministry and between the vision of how we want to live. Hopefully, something optimistic you can believe in. The world doesn't have an answer to your problems, it has the problems to which you need to find your answer. Pinelander out.